Hey patrons, and welcome to December's patron-only Q&A video. I hope you guys all had a great month and a great set of holidays. I'm sure we're all looking forward to the end of 2016 in a couple days. It's been, in a lot of respects, a bit of a rough year. I can't call it a total loss because my wife and I did have our second son this year, so I can't completely write off 2016, but that really is just about the only highlight in an otherwise fairly shitty year. So I'm sure we're all hoping 2017 is going to be a little bit better. But with that said, let's jump right into some questions. Okay, so the first question I'm going to answer this month comes from Alejandro. Alejandro says, previous Choose the Adventure style comics you made obviously had little to no plot armor. Starcaster Chronicles has clearly been different, but how much plot armor has there been, and how many choices could have left the galaxy in ruins? So full disclosure, I actually had to Google what plot armor meant. And so for anybody else that is similarly kind of in the dark on this particular trope, I guess it's like also referred to as like a character shield. And it's basically when the main character's life is somewhat safeguarded solely by the fact that they can't be removed from the story. Like the story is so focused on them that you can't actually take them out, so they're not ever in any real danger. And so, all right. So to rewind, I assume by previous Choose Your Own Adventure style stories, you're talking about the Ethan McManus space archaeologist run that I ran, a number of years ago. And so in that regard, you're right. And initially there was no plot armor. I thought the novelty of the concept was that a choice could lead to his death, which we saw in the first issue of that particular series. But that also taught me a lesson, regarding kind of the nuance of the way I do a Choose Your Own Adventure versus the books that I read growing up as a kid. And that is that if you die in the books, where you have the entire novel and all the different choices already written out for you, it's as simple as like you die, you rewind to the previous decision, and you make a different choice and go down a different path and explore that. But because I'm creating these as the choices are made, and sort of, the choices that we come to are a little bit more permanent. They become canon, and that's like the storyline. It's not quite as easy to do that, or it's near impossible to do that. And it's also really no fun to invest a whole lot into a story or a character just to have them die kind of randomly like that. So, so there has been a degree of plot armor, I guess you could say, in these first, I consider the first 5 issues of the Starcaster Chronicles to kind of be the first chapter. The first chapter was focused on this guy, Court, kind of falling into this bigger adventure, getting wrapped up in this whole thing with the Starcaster, and culminating with actually getting there and finding it. So this first chapter was more about what sort of condition Court and Spec and Naira were actually in by the time they got to where the Starcaster was. Less about, whether or not any of them died along the way or that sort of thing, but, how badly they were injured or dismembered or disfigured or whatever else. There was nothing that could have left the galaxy in ruins. The stakes aren't quite that high just yet, at least in this first chapter. In this first chapter, everything was very localized. The Starcaster was the fact that there was this Starcaster out there waiting to be found was a secret kept to, a couple small groups of people, Naira and Court, obviously the Drangliacs and the Syndicate. They weren't trying to let the word get out that they didn't actually have this Starcaster. So it was a very contained element. So there was nothing like the galaxy was at risk. But I will also say that now that we've reached that point, the first chapter is over, and they have the Starcaster in hand. A number of those bets are off. I will point out that there is a reason when designing this story that I titled it the Starcaster Chronicles and not the Court Rider Chronicles or something. But I hope you kind of get what I'm getting at here is that the story is really about the Starcaster, and while at this particular moment Court is sort of our protagonist, it is not. He is no longer necessarily safeguarded by the fact that he is the protagonist, because as I view it, what we're really following here is the story of the Starcaster. So we'll see going forward, obviously, because like I said, while this first chapter was kind of a very contained event, as a result of getting the Starcaster, a lot of people, on the Federation ships and whatnot, have now become aware that there is a Starcaster in play, for lack of a better word. So the next, the next chapter, the next 5 issues will be a much more galactic tale and have some much wider reaching ramifications than this first one did. So, and like I said, I mean, there is, from this point on, no guarantee that Court will actually survive, but Court not surviving does not equal the end of the story, because somebody else, the Starcaster, would then fall into possession of somebody else, and the story would continue on from their viewpoint. So to sum up your question, there was a degree of plot armor, in order to tell the story that I wanted to. I wouldn't say that Court was immune. There were certainly, he could have fared better and he could have fared a lot worse. But now there is pretty much no plot armor, I would say. Okay, so Roderick wants to know, when I set out to start the Starcaster Chronicles series, how many issues that I planned on, and has that changed at all? And this ties a little bit into Alejandro's question in terms of, I really set out with this idea of, the first 5 issues being the first chapter of this story, and there were a number of reasons for that. Basically when I plotted it out, 5 issues felt like a really good number in terms of like letting the audience kind of get to know Court and Spec and Naira, and kind of becoming invested in those characters a little bit before actually finding the Starcaster itself. So that when we actually got to that point and we have to make some decisions regarding this, this piece of alien technology with this incredible power, that those decisions are going to have some weight behind it that they wouldn't have if we came across the Starcaster just right out of the gate in issue 1. So 5 issues, this first chapter, kind of was always the plan to at least get to this point. And obviously, now that I've gotten to this point, if the response is overwhelmingly negative and people are like, I don't really care about this series, it's, good effort, but, it's not really doing it for me, and, then certainly I can step back and I can evaluate that and whether or not it's worth continuing. But I at least always set out to do, 5 issues to kind of introduce this galaxy, this story, these characters, and kind of, lead up to this big event, as opposed to just kind of starting with it out of the gate. And so now that we've done that, now that I've had the opportunity to kind of show everybody, a slice of this, this galaxy that I have in mind, and the characters and the adventures that, that I want to fill it with. Certainly, how far we go is going to be, related to the sort of ongoing response and support the series receives. I'm certainly 100% on board with continuing it. So it's just a matter of seeing whether or not the readers are as invested in that concept as I am. So Jenny Black wants to know how long on average it takes me to finish a single comic strip. And that kind of depends a little bit based on what sort of comic I'm doing. So if it's a typical gaming one-shot, like just a gag strip, that could take anywhere from like maybe 5 to 8 hours. And the variable in there comes down mostly to coming up with the idea itself. How long I sit on the computer reading news, reading up on the latest games, and that sort of thing before I formulate an idea. like what new game I'm playing that might have given me ideas and that sort of thing. Sometimes the idea comes to me right away, or I'll even have the idea like the night before. So I wake up and I go to work and I can immediately put pencil to paper. And sometimes it takes a little bit of work. Sometimes I really have to kind of struggle with it and shape it and try and figure that out. So I would say between like say 5 hours on the short side, 8ish hours on the long side, if coming to that idea takes a little bit more work. But that is for like I said, a kind of standard 3 to 4 panel, very basic one-shot comic. Now, the more comic book style things that I do, for instance, like a Starcaster page, which will have more panels and quite a bit more detail, a greater number of people per panel, much more complex backgrounds and that sort of thing. The trade-off is that I typically don't have to spend as long coming up with the idea, because the story's kind of already written out in advance for me. So I've already kind of, and it's also a little bit easier because what happens here, naturally informs the next step and the next step and that sort of thing. But because there is so much more detail and attention to detail and that sort of thing, I would say that those pages take between 7 to 10 hours, just again, based on the complexity of exactly what I'm drawing. There are definitely times where I sit down in the morning and I work all day, and then I have dinner and I actually have to do some work after dinner to finish it up, in order to then get that off to the colorist. But I would say those are the two rough averages that I think you're asking about. Michael Sears wants to know if I'm aware of the Kingdom Death Monster 1.5 Kickstarter. I am absolutely 100% aware. I was a backer on that for, within, I would say, the first couple hours. I actually snagged one of the pledge levels that isn't available anymore. And the reason for that is because Kingdom Death is hands down my favorite board game of all time. I have never had a board game experience quite on the level of Kingdom Death, where, session after session, when my friends and I would get together and play it, we would play for 2-3 hours at a time, and at the end we were just emotionally drained. Like, that is how intense and just insane that game is. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm on board for pretty much anything Adam Poots does ever for the rest of his life, because it's just a really high quality product. Right now, unfortunately, with 2 small children, I don't have as much time to, rather, let me rephrase that, I have no time to paint miniatures at the moment, but I still love painting miniatures, and I'm excited about, once I do get some free time again, being able to dive into my Kingdom Death, collection of miniatures, because they really are gorgeous minis and a lot of fun to paint. So, I think it was, what was it, earlier this year, this past winter, I did a campaign online with a friend of mine through Twitch. At any rate, we've actually been talking about doing another one after the new year, because it's been a little while since we've played, and we both kind of have that itch to get into another campaign. This time maybe with a couple of the available expansions to kind of change things up a little bit. But you certainly will be seeing some more Kingdom Death campaign posts from me in the near future. Okay, that's going to be it for December's Q&A video. I just want to take this moment to thank you all so much for your support this year. I can't even tell you, the peace of mind that the Patreon support gives me and my family. The reason for that is, my income outside of Patreon is pretty much based around some advertising and merchandising. Which is and it's great, but it also it fluctuates a lot depending on seasons and a whole bunch of variables. So Patreon has definitely been that somewhat steady sort of, okay, I can count on this. I know I can pay the mortgage. I know I can buy groceries and and I can afford to pay a colorist to help me do the Starcaster Chronicles and Analog and D-Pad and stuff like that. It's just knowing that support is there makes a huge difference, and that's entirely because of you. And I just want to say, how grateful not only I am, but just for the peace of mind, but for my family as well. Thank you so much for believing in the comic, believing in me, and I love being able to provide you guys with additional content and that sort of thing. So thank you guys all so much for everything, and we'll see you in 2017.